a former Homeland Security agent who now lives a quiet suburban life. I traded covert operations and high-stakes missions for a modest house in a peaceful neighborhood, where the biggest threat used to be a rogue drone, not an overzealous HOA. I keep my past under wraps. Most people just see me as a quiet guy who takes care of his family. Every morning, I sip my coffee on the back porch, watching the neighborhood wake up, while silently remembering the days when every detail mattered. And now I'm just trying to enjoy the simple rhythm of family life. My wife, Sarah, is the heart of our little world. Soft-spoken and endlessly caring, she radiates warmth and strength, even in the quiet moments of our daily routine. Currently, she's expecting our first child, a blessing we both cherish deeply, and every corner of our home whispers promises of new beginnings. I watch her as she lovingly arranges fresh flowers in a vase, her gentle smile lighting up the room despite the lingering stress of our suburban life. Even amidst the tranquility, there's an unspoken determination in her eyes, a silent vow to protect what we've built together. Her pregnancy has filled our home with hope and vulnerability, making every small intrusion or disturbance feel all the more personal. And though I keep the details of my past tightly under wraps, it's her safety, and the safety of our future child, that fuels every instinct to stand up for our family. Enter HOA Karen, the personification of petty authority in our neighborhood. Known for her unyielding, almost militaristic approach to enforcing the smallest regulations, she made her rounds with an air of self-importance and a clipboard in hand. With a tightly pulled bun and perfectly pressed clothes that contrasted sharply with her abrasive demeanor, HOA Karen was infamous for turning even the most minor infractions into a public spectacle. Neighbors whispered that she lived for the thrill of citing errors no one else would notice. Her eyes, sharp and unrelenting, missed nothing, from a slightly untrimmed hedge to a single blade of grass out of place. And today, it seemed, her relentless pursuit of perfection was about to collide head-on with our quiet suburban life. It all began with a seemingly insignificant patch of untrimmed grass, a slight deviation from the HOA's meticulously maintained standard that, in any other circumstance, might have gone unnoticed. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden with the same care that had carried me through countless covert missions, an official-looking envelope arrived. The crisp, sterile letter inside cited a $29 fine for a grass violation, claiming that a small area along the fence line did not meet the neighborhood's stringent standards. To me, it was baffling. I prided myself on keeping every inch of my property immaculate. Yet, according to the HOA's exacting standards, that single stray blade was enough to trigger a penalty. As I held the notice, I couldn't help but feel that this minor infraction was less about the grass and more about enforcing control, a pretext for asserting power in a system that thrived on punishing even the smallest deviations from its ideal. Little did I know, this fine was the spark that would ignite an all-out battle, pitting my family's privacy against the relentless, overzealous reach of HOA Karen. One afternoon, just a day after receiving that absurd fine, the unthinkable happened. While I was busy in the garden, I heard a crash from the side of the house. Rushing over, I found our backyard shed, the one Sarah used to store her knitting supplies and a few cherished mementos, wide open. Standing there, clipboard in hand and eyes wild with self-righteous fervor, was none other than HOA Karen. Without so much as a knock, she had broken into our shed, claiming she needed to inspect the property for compliance with the neighborhood standards. I felt my stomach drop as I saw the worry etched on Sarah's face. She was pregnant, and that shed was her little haven. Karen's intrusion was not just an act of petty enforcement. It was a blatant violation of our privacy and sanctity of home. Before I could speak, she began rifling through boxes, muttering about overgrown grass and improper storage. The air thickened with tension as I stepped in, trying to balance the calm I'd honed over years of covert operations with the raw anger boiling inside me. In that moment, every instinct screamed that this was more than a minor dispute. It was the tipping point of an already volatile situation. I was stunned into silence for a split second, every muscle in my body tensing as I processed the intrusion. My heart pounded in my ears as I took in the scene. Sarah's shed, our quiet sanctuary, had been violated by a force so petty yet invasive it shook me to my core. I felt an overwhelming surge of shock and indignation. In that moment, every instinct honed during my years in Homeland Security kicked in, the need to protect, to secure, and to fight back against any encroachment on what was sacred to my family. Sarah stood at the doorway, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief, the reality of her vulnerability in her own home crashing down around her. I stepped forward, the cold determination of my past battles flooding in as I realized the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about a stray patch of grass or a $29 fine. It was about defending our right to privacy, safety, and dignity. My mind raced with thoughts of countermeasures. But first, I had to confront the reality of this violation. Every fiber of my being burned with the need to ensure that such an overreach would not go unanswered. The shock of that moment slowly turned into a steely resolve, a promise to protect my family and reclaim the sanctity of our home no matter what it took. I stepped forward, and in that charged moment, I could no longer hold back the carefully guarded secrets of my past. With a measured, calm tone honed by years of covert operations, I said, "Oh, Karen, you've crossed a line." My voice was steady but carried the weight of unspoken authority. The very air around us seemed to thicken as I continued. "You don't realize who you're dealing with. I spent years protecting national security, and I won't allow my family's sanctuary to be trampled by petty bureaucracy." Her eyes widened, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through her usual smug confidence as the realization of my hidden depths dawned on her. For a moment, the relentless enforcer seemed exposed, a mere mortal behind a facade of unyielding authority. I could see the shift in the crowd, whispers starting to spread as they sensed that my quiet demeanor belied a formidable past. In that instant, my carefully honed instincts took over. Every muscle in my body was primed, every sense alert as I prepared to defend my home and my family. The revelation of my background wasn't a threat, it was a promise. A promise that any further transgressions would be met with a force far greater than mere petty fines. HOA Karen's bravado faltered as she hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the depth of my resolve. The balance of power had shifted, and I could almost hear the collective murmur of the community as they realized that this was not just another dispute over lawn care. It was a battle for the very right to live in peace, protected by those who had once safeguarded the nation itself. The tension exploded into a full-blown confrontation. HOA Karen, her confidence shaken but determined to enforce her rule, began rattling off an endless list of petty violations, each one more absurd than the last. "Your grass is too long in this section," she barked, waving a printout of a regulation that made little sense in our perfectly maintained yard. "And your shed door doesn't meet the approved color standard." Her words came out in rapid-fire succession, each accusation more preposterous than the previous one. I stood there, unwavering, as her tirade escalated. With each claim, my calm defiance grew stronger. I countered every baseless regulation with precise, measured responses that drew on my years of training and experience. "HOA Karen," I said firmly, "the real violation here is the invasion of our privacy. The rules you're citing are meaningless when they come at the cost of our family's safety and dignity." My voice resonated with authority, a stark reminder that behind my quiet exterior was a past forged in high-stakes situations. The argument reached a fever pitch. Neighbors, who had been watching in tense silence, began murmuring in support. I could see their expressions shift from cautious curiosity to outright indignation at the oppressive display of arbitrary power. The air thickened with the intensity of our clash, a collision between the rigid, bureaucratic mindset and a man who embodied the protective spirit of his family and community. Karen's eyes darted around, realizing that her relentless recitation of trivial bylaws was crumbling in the face of my steadfast refusal to be intimidated. The palpable escalation of the conflict wasn't just a private dispute anymore. It was rapidly becoming a public spectacle that exposed the absurdity of the rules meant to govern our lives. And in that charged moment, the balance of power had clearly shifted in favor of every neighbor who had ever felt oppressed by the petty tyranny of overzealous authority. Then, as the tension reached its zenith, everything pivoted in a heartbeat, a turning point that no one could have foreseen. Just as HOA Karen's litany of petty violations reached its peak, a distant siren wailed, slicing through the heated exchange. In that split second, the murmurs of the gathered neighbors turned into shocked silence. I felt my pulse quicken. That sound wasn't part of any neighborhood routine. Before she could launch into another baseless accusation, a couple of well-dressed officials arrived at the scene. They identified themselves as local code enforcement officers, an unexpected twist that immediately threw the entire situation into disarray. Their arrival, a direct response to several frantic calls from our outraged neighbors, signaled that the balance of power was shifting in our favor. With calm authority, the officers began to question HOA Karen about her actions. Their measured tones and professional demeanor left no room for her usual bluster. In the charged atmosphere, even I sensed that this was our moment, the turning point where the absurdity of her petty tyranny was about to be exposed. The officers scrutinized the incident with impartial eyes, noting every detail from the broken shed door to the overly aggressive manner in which she had conducted her so-called inspection. As the crowd watched in stunned silence, it became clear that our confrontation had transcended a mere domestic squabble. It was now a public reckoning, a pivot point where the voices of the community and the rule of law converged to put an end to arbitrary overreach. In that decisive moment, I knew that our fight for justice had gained a crucial ally, and the oppressive shadow of HOA Karen was beginning to crumble under the weight of accountability. The fallout was immediate and electric. As the code enforcement officers took charge of the situation, a palpable shift rippled through the gathered crowd. Neighbors, who had silently borne witness to years of HOA overreach, suddenly found their voices. One by one, residents began to step forward, recounting their own stories of petty fines and invasive inspections. Their murmurs turned into a steady, unified outcry against the arbitrary tyranny that had plagued our community for too long. Within minutes, the scene morphed from a tense standoff into a vibrant, impassioned rally. Several residents began filming the incident on their smartphones, their videos capturing every moment. The stunned look on HOA Karen's face, the calm authority of the code enforcement officers, and my own unwavering stance defending my family's privacy. Social media buzzed in real time as live streams and hashtags exploded, with neighbors labeling the moment as a turning point in the fight against oppressive governance. In the midst of the chaos, a few longtime residents, who had been victims of similar petty infringements, voiced their support. They spoke of having endured years of arbitrary fines and intrusive inspections, and their stories resonated with the crowd. It was as if every whispered grievance had found a public forum. The community's solidarity was undeniable, their collective outrage converging into a single, powerful message: enough was enough. By the time the officers wrapped up their investigation, it was clear that HOA Karen's credibility had been irreparably damaged. The local press had arrived, and soon headlines began to take shape, depicting a David versus Goliath battle, with everyday citizens rising to challenge a system of unchecked power. The public reaction was swift: calls for a review of HOA practices, demands for accountability, and a series of impassioned social media posts that vowed to keep this story alive until meaningful change was achieved. In that charged moment, our community wasn't just reacting, it was rebelling. The support, the evidence, and the undeniable collective will of the people had turned the tide. It was a moment of vindication, a clear message to all who had been oppressed by HOA overreach that their voices mattered. And as I stood there, amidst the outpouring of solidarity and the fervor of my neighbors, I knew that this was only the beginning of a fight that would reshape our community for the better. In the days that followed the explosive confrontation, a quiet calm settled over the neighborhood, a temporary lull after the storm of voices, cameras, and media attention. I spent long hours on the fairway at dawn, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. Every blade of grass, once a symbol of my hard-fought sanctuary, now carried echoes of our community's defiant stand. I couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. A minor $29 grass violation had triggered an all-out battle that exposed years of petty tyranny and the resilience of ordinary people. I recalled how a routine inspection had spiraled into an unforgettable showdown, and how the support of my neighbors had transformed an act of oppression into a powerful, unified movement. In that reflective solitude, I realized that our fight was about much more than defending a property. It was about reclaiming our dignity and the right to live free from invasive control. Though the confrontation had taken its toll, both emotionally and physically, I found solace in knowing that the ripples of our rebellion were already reaching far beyond our cul-de-sac. The headlines, the social media uproar, and the impassioned calls for reform were proof that even the smallest spark could ignite a transformative fire. Our community, once fragmented by silent suffering, had finally found its voice. As I looked out over the fairway, scarred yet vibrant with newfound hope, I vow to keep protecting my family and our home at all costs. This moment of reflection reinforced a fundamental truth. Sometimes, standing up for what matters means embracing the absurdity of the battle and trusting that, in the end, truth and unity will prevail. And so, with a deep, steadying breath and the soft whisper of the morning wind as my companion, I stepped forward into a future defined not by petty fines and overzealous rules, but by the enduring strength of a community united in defiance. In the weeks that followed, the incident became both a cautionary tale and a rallying cry throughout our neighborhood. I found myself revisiting that fateful day often, each memory a reminder of how a trivial $29 fine had erupted into a battle that redefined our community. Every conversation I had now carried echoes of that confrontation, and every shared glance among neighbors seemed to affirm that we would no longer tolerate invasive, petty authority. Late one evening, as I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee, the gentle hum of the night mingling with distant voices, I reflected on the chaos and the newfound unity. It was surreal. A minor grass violation had morphed into a movement, a defining moment that revealed the strength of community pushed to the brink. I thought of Sarah, her eyes soft with both relief and lingering worry, and of our unborn child, a symbol of hope amid the absurdity of it all. I acknowledged that our fight wasn't over, but the resolve and solidarity we'd built had changed something fundamental. I had become more than a quiet suburban man. I was now a defender of our collective rights, a guardian against the overzealous reach of those who saw rules as a means to control rather than protect. My past in Homeland Security, once a silent shadow, had found its purpose in safeguarding not just my family, but our entire community's freedom. As I watched the moon rise over the fairway, its gentle glow a stark contrast to the harsh spotlight of media scrutiny, I realized that every scar on the grass, every whisper of rebellion, was a testament to our unwillingness to be cowed. We had reclaimed our space, and in doing so, we had sparked a transformation that would resonate long after the immediate crisis had passed. The absurdity of the situation, once a source of anger, now served as a powerful reminder. Even the smallest act of defiance can blossom into a movement for justice. And as I closed my eyes that night, I made a silent promise to continue protecting our home, our community, and the simple, cherished values that made our lives worth defending.